Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Russ Hodge in Memphis, Tennessee, Dan Rather in New York, Bernard Kalb in Saigon, Marvin Kalb in Wellington, New Zealand, and Bert Quint in Quezon, South Vietnam.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. Police, who have been keeping a close watch over the Nobel Peace Prize winner because of Memphis' turbulent racial situation, were on the scene almost immediately. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck. Police said they found a high-powered hunting rifle about a block from the hotel, but it was not immediately identified as the murder weapon. Mayor Henry Loeb has reinstated the dusk-to-dawn curfew he imposed on the city last week when a march led by Dr. King erupted in violence. Governor Buford Ellington has called out 4,000 National Guardsmen, and police report that the murder has touched off sporadic acts of violence in a Negro section of the city.
I was a boarding school student in New Hampshire when this occurred. It was a campus where there were just a few minority students, and so the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., I would think, had a great deal more impact on the African American students on campus than on others, because he was in fact the spiritual leader of the civil rights movement at that time. It was kind of isolated, given the atmosphere of that particular campus, isolated from a lot of things that were going on in society. It was a boarding school experience, and students were there from various parts of the country, not many from the South, not many who had been in areas where they had experienced or seen the kind of segregation that existed in the South, the Deep South. And there were not many who had certainly had the experience I had had before leaving Pine Bluff, Arkansas to go there. I had experiences that were centered around the Jim Crow society of that time. So I drank out of colored water fountains. I rode at the back of the bus. I went to all black public schools in Pine Bluff. I understood the South and the segregated apartheid-like system that we had. I was somewhere on campus. I've forgotten the time of day it was, but soon after it occurred, I heard about it, and word swept the campus. I was hurt. I was devastated because Martin Luther King symbolized to me one who was out fighting for what was right. He was fighting for justice for all people. He was a peaceful man. He was a man of peace, a man of nonviolence. He was a man of character. He was a man of faith. And he was one that people followed because of his charisma, because of his character, because of his commitment to the movement. People believed that he was for real in speaking up against injustice and speaking up for the rights of all people, but especially for the rights of African Americans in this country. I don't know the impact on all of them. On the African American students, it was certainly a shock, and there was impact. I think we met together in the organization that we had on campus, and we tried to console each other and to discuss it. There was anger, there was bitterness, there was also sadness, and there was this feeling that there would be a vacuum in leadership in the African American community because of Dr. King's assassination. I really had not thought that much about it, but it was in a sense no surprise because I had also been aware of things when Medgar Evers had been assassinated in Mississippi, when others had been killed for their involvement. So I knew that their lives were in danger. I guess I had not thought that about Dr. King as much because he had been so many places and done so many things, and he had emerged without having been slain. So I wasn't looking for him to be assassinated at that time. He had escaped a whole lot of danger. I think people are feeling their way through the struggle. I think a lot of people are doing the best that they know how to do. It's a different time, it's a different era. The tactics are different. The people's attitudes are different. Younger people are not going to put up with what older people put up with during those days. As one of my closest friends says that his son told him, "We are not our ancestors." So they're not going to put up some of the things that we tolerated. And he meant that affectionately, but he meant that with determination as well. We will fight it out for some things. And I think that's the attitude that a lot of young people have. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with it. I think Martin Luther King was just tremendously brilliant in the leadership that he gave at that particular time. I don't know that there was another tactic, another approach other than the nonviolence that he espoused that would have been as effective. And he was a moral leader, and people of other backgrounds and ethnicities respected that about him. And I think they followed him and they supported what he was trying to do as a result of that. They saw him as someone who was passionate, who was concerned, who was totally committed, and he was trying to do his best. Towards the end of his life, there was less devotion to nonviolence. The Black Power movement had emerged, and people were saying things like "Burn, baby, burn," and so King was having to adjust to that. And when it started off, when he first emerged, I think he had most people with him, or most African Americans with him on the issue of nonviolence. Younger people came along, and some old heads who said, "I'm not turning the other cheek under any circumstances. This is a fight, and whatever means necessary," is the way that some people took it. And you had Malcolm X had emerged in the 60s, and then just people like Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown and the Black Panthers and others were saying that we will take action, militant action, if necessary, in order to fight for the rights of African Americans. It's a different time. People have to prayerfully, in my view, since I'm a person of faith, prayerfully decide what is the best approach for them to take. Those of us who are older don't really know what's best for this generation to do. A lot of times we don't experience things the way that your generation experiences things. And so we're not in a position of really knowing how you feel about what happens to you on a daily basis, how discrimination and racism impact you. And so I think people have to assess that for themselves and take a course of action. But I think they have to think through whatever action they take. Martin Luther King thought through his approach to the struggle, the nonviolent approach, and he knew that African Americans would have been devastated had we tried any other approach. And he stuck to it. He did what he had to do for his generation. I think that today our young people are in different positions. Many have advanced in politics, in business, and they have assumed positions that African Americans, for the most part, did not have during the time of Dr. King's life. And so they are confronted with issues on a daily basis. And I would have to defer to them in how they approach these matters and how they deal with instances of racism. Well, I think this generation has been very straightforward in approaching issues of racism in the United States. I think this generation has shown courage. I regret that this generation has to go through some of these things, and older people like me kind of sort of thought that we had taken care of some of these issues. But then we're reminded that every generation has a struggle. We cannot rest on the laurels of the past. Every generation has something to do to contribute to the advancement of justice in our society. And so I look to see how the young people emerge to take on this responsibility, to take on this work, to take on this task. And older folks of us have to be around to do counseling, or for younger people to consult with for advice on various matters. But again, it's the people who are faced with the day-to-day struggle who know how it impacts them and how it affects them and their lives. And so they're the best ones for taking action. Take it wisely, and I say prayerfully. Martin Luther King understood, as our faith teaches us as Christians, that without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. And really often it comes down to it that without the shedding of blood, there's no change in society. And it's often innocent blood. It's not necessarily militant or aggressive behavior on the part of the person that leads to bloodshed. Sometimes it's the people who take things peacefully who will end up being the victims of the bloodshed, but they have stood up for what was right in the way that they believed it to be done, and they pay a price for it. So I think people do have to understand that sometimes people pay a price. In my opinion, it's a price that shouldn't have to be paid. There's no sense for police going in Breonna Taylor's apartment and killing her, and there's certainly no sense in someone holding his knee to someone's neck and the person not being able to breathe. What is the point of this? What is the sense in it? It's just awful. And you would think that no one would want to do that. But we see that people do it, so we have to speak up. We have to holler ouch when something hurts. Otherwise, people don't know or take for granted that we accept that. So we can't accept it, but we've got to attack it in a way that is wise and that requires some discernment on our part, and with the least amount of bloodshed as possible.
In a nationwide television address, President Johnson expressed the nation's shock.
America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King. I ask every citizen to reject the blind violence that has struck Dr. King, who lived by nonviolence.
Well, April 4th, 1968 was a Thursday. I was 12 years old, should have been in the 6th grade. Just a normal, regular day. Started out anyways. It was great sadness, and I just remember the environment at school as well as at home that day, or after hearing the news, was just a very somber mood with great sadness that another of our leaders, national leaders, had been assassinated. The memory of President Kennedy's assassination was still fresh even in my family, and so it was a very somber time. Well, as I recall, I'm sure that we were notified by announcement at school and probably some words from our teacher. Upon getting home, our little black and white TV blasted news of the assassination, I'm sure all evening and for the next several days. Oh, as I said, it's just very somber. And for a 12-year-old young boy that was used to going to school and having dinner, at home with his family every evening and playing some kind of ball, either on the playground or in the yard with my friends and neighbors, it was in great contrast to those times. There was a feeling of uncertainty and insecurity because it became clear at my young age that nobody was safe, that people could reach out and kill you, and there was little you could do about it. That was really unsettling. Dr. King wasn't unpopular in my household in Cleveland, Ohio. He was another leader of the time. So it's just that's really why I think it was so much shock really when he was assassinated. Furthest thing from my mind. I think it gave a sense of urgency, and the folks that he had mentored and had worked alongside in this effort for equality and equity. It gave them, I think, a recharge or a new charge of energy to keep moving forward and keep the sermon or the preaching of Dr. King alive in his messages. And I think that we experienced a great amount of progress after his death. And that's maybe the sacrifice and maybe why things turned out that way, was to get that extra boost of progress.
Dr. King had returned to Memphis only yesterday, determined to prove that he could lead a peaceful mass march in support of striking sanitation workers, most of whom are Negroes. Dr. King had this to say last night about the situation in Memphis.
Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right.
There was shock in Harlem tonight when word of Dr. King's murder reached the nation's largest Negro community. Men, women, and children poured into the streets. They appeared dazed. Many were crying. A young Negro said Dr. King didn't really have to go back to Memphis. Maybe he wanted to prove something.
April 4th, 1968 was a Thursday, and Martin Luther King was assassinated at 6 p.m. As a 10-year-old, I was out playing, but when I came home, I knew the world had changed. As a 10-year-old, we are often protected during that era in reference to the world behind us, around us. However, although that there was rage in our community, there was also hope. Hope that his work would continue, and it has. In that era, everyone watched the evening news. And as I got home and it was on, as my grandmother was finishing up cooking dinner, fried chicken and pinto beans and cornbread usually, but she stopped and we all stopped to absorb that news. And we as children were protected. As I recall, everything is going to be all right. However, they killed Dr. King. And I don't know who that they was. However, as I said, there was rage. There was rage in the community, but there was also hope. And there was hope in Arkansas as I look back and see what Governor Rockefeller did during that period. Governor Rockefeller, one of the few Southern governors that gathered members of the African American community, the Negro community at that time, and others throughout the state, and gathered here today where I am at the Capitol, and said that Arkansas would be better for the work that Martin Luther King had done. That is part of the legacy of Governor Rockefeller. My generation is the benefactor of the life, legacy, and work, and I want to say that word again, work of Dr. Martin Luther King. Today, Mr. DuShun Scarbrough is the Executive Director of the Martin Luther King Commission. Ms. Pettis, your work at the Martin Luther King Commission that I've seen over the last 6 or 7 years, my responsibility as the Secretary of the Arkansas Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. King's work and his philosophy made America, or gave America an opportunity to be all that it could be, and it's given me the opportunity to be all that I can be. And I'm thankful for Dr. Martin Luther King and his life.
Okay, April 4th, I was in the 3rd grade as a student, and I remember them coming over the intercom telling us that Dr. King had been shot. And of course, we all were just at awe, and he could hear a pin drop when that happened, and then in disbelief that he had been shot. Sad that someone had been killed, and you know, we didn't understand why at that point, wondering why would that happen? You know, why would, you know, someone shoot Dr. King? And then, but as we continued to talk, you know, it did come to the realization at that point, hey, but he was a black man, you know, trying to correct the wrong that was done to us as black people during that time. And then, but I remember my sister, who was living in Chicago, called us, was telling us about Dr. King and all that, and everyone was real upset and in disbelief. You know, of course, my parents always want to try to keep everything low key and making sure that, again, we did not take this to heart and didn't want us to be feeling bad about it, because, you know, it was out of our hands, but they did want us to remember Dr. King for what he stood for. So they too trying to, you know, console us and talk to us about, you know, they really was kind of disappointed that this took place, but God, you know, they're Christian folks, so I remember them saying, God knows best and he would take care of it. So I don't think we would be where we are today without Dr. King giving his life for us. You know, he fought for peace, he fought for justice, he fought for equality. And then, you know, I would never forget how he, his famous speech was talking about he was there to make sure that he had that dream that one day his 4 little children would be able to, you know, live in a country where they would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And so he preached that and believed in that. And I feel that some doors have been opened because what Dr. King stood for and what he preached and all. And we too have continued to carry out that dream. And I think I'm where I am today because of Dr. King, you know, talking about equality and justice for all, and opening doors for us to be where we are today, like in a predominantly white school district as the superintendent in Fayetteville, Arkansas. You know, I think because of what he stood for, it opened those doors to allow me to be where I am today. So we, you know, we have come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go because we still see that our people live in poverty, they're not treated correctly and all that. So we still have to continue to fight and stand up for what is right because his dream is not there completely. So therefore it behoves us that we need to fight and make sure that his dream does become reality one day because we're not there yet. Tell them first to learn about their history, the past, learn about what their forefathers had to do and go through for us. They need to learn how a lot of those people, Dr. King and a lot of other civil rights leaders, they gave their life for us. You know, they fought for justice and equality. So therefore, they laid that foundation. So therefore, it's left up to them to take advantage of the opportunities. They're there for them to improve their lives and improve the lives for their kids and the kids to come after them. But they had to take that torch that is burning and it's about to go out if we don't continue to keep the gas on and keep it burning. So it's left up to them.
For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own deep despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. Return home, say a prayer for the family Martin Luther King. Yeah, it's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love. A prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke.